So, Stephen, why don't hello and welcome to an incredibly special edition of the stream. My name, of course, is Colin Mortimer, and you've probably seen me here before, so this is nothing new for many of you, but welcome those who are new to the stream. Very shortly, Representative Scott Peters of California will be joining us on the stream to talk about his climate plan. Representative Scott Peters is at the forefront of climate in Congress. And I think he has a lot of really interesting ideas that just don't get the attention they deserve. So, what I'm hoping today is that this will be an opportunity to bring his ideas to a new audience and build up some excitement. He is going to be joining us at 7 p.m. So, in the meantime, I'm going to mute that tab before we begin. Welcome to Twitch, where we are not CNN. In the meantime, I'm going to go over what this event is about, what are the ground rules, and build up some hype. So, as I've said, Representative Scott Peters is out in California. He is in the New Democrat Coalition, which, for those who aren't aware, are kind of the heirs to the moderate coalition, or the moderates in Congress in the 90s. But they are one of the largest coalitions in Congress, and they represent a significant number of swing districts, which includes Representative Scott Peters. And for those who aren't aware, but you should be aware, moderates are important in Congress because they're the ones who normally are going to win these swing districts. Research has shown, and just observational data has shown, that if you're a moderate, you have a better chance of winning in these districts. And while you might not always agree with moderates, for some of the more progressive friends on this stream, they are the reason why Democrats hold their congressional majority, their House majority, and their Senate majority. So their importance can't be understated if you care about Democrats having a majority in Congress, or if you care about moderate policies. So if you're like me, a new liberal myself, you get the best of both worlds out of someone like Scott Peters. So this is also kind of crazy. So for those who are not aware of the history of the stream, this began last year, around like this time last year, back it up a month maybe, when COVID was just beginning. And I talked to Jeremiah, who many of you are familiar with as the other host on this stream. And I said, hey, let's do something on Twitch for the time that we are in quarantine, thinking that this would end fairly soon. And I thought, hey, like for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, if this goes long, Jeremiah will stream. We'll do some fun games. We'll do some fun events. We'll do some fun interviews just to pass the time during COVID so that we can hit the ground running and go back to in-person events in like May. Well, we all know how that turned out. And the stream has become a beast of its own within this organization. I looked at the data, like between Jeremiah and I, we've streamed like 10 days worth of content in the past year. So a non-0% of our lives has been streaming. And it's been honestly great. It's a great way to have pragmatic, important discussions about issues that just don't get the traction that they do elsewhere, to inject some pragmatism into a platform that is very often not pragmatic, and just have some fun. If you guys watch me on the stream, you'll see I play GeoGuessr all the time because this is a fantastic, fun game. But if you told me when we began this stream that in a year we'd still be doing it and that we'd also have a representative on the stream, I would probably think you were insane for saying that a year later we'd still be doing the stream, because then we'd still be in COVID. But I'd also think you were insane that we were going to get a representative on the stream. So I want to thank in advance Representative Scott Peters and his team for agreeing to do this. He becomes one of the few members of Congress, sitting members of Congress, to join a Twitch stream. So he joins a very, very exclusive club that I think is a good club, personally, if you're trying to reach people who are not normally reached by these kinds of policy issues. So today's topic is going to be about climate. Obviously, climate is a big issue. I assume if you're watching the stream, you think climate is a big issue, but the solutions to climate change are all over the place, obviously. You have carbon tax proposals. You have Green New Deal style proposals. You have carbon capture proposals. You have ban fossil fuel proposals all over the place. And Scott has what I think is one of the most concise and novel and ambitious proposals out there. And like I said at the beginning, it deserves more attention, which is why we're so excited to bring it to you guys tonight. I'm going to go over the event very briefly, just to explain what's going to be happening tonight, what the format's going to be, and what we want you guys to do. So the first 40 minutes of this event is going to be me talking to Scott. I have some questions for him that I think are important to ask. We're going to talk about carbon capture. We're going to talk about carbon taxes. We're going to talk specifically about why he has a dividend in his carbon tax proposal. We're going to talk about the global approach to the climate, because you can't have a conversation about climate unless you start talking about other countries, their emissions, and how they have to be involved in this fight too, or how we can make our policies reduce their emissions too, at least indirectly. And then we're going to talk about his state of California, because he lives in San Diego, which is going to be a city that is going to be at the forefront of climate change in the United States. And I have a question for him about, and I think I know the answer, but I want to hear from him, why he has put so much effort into climate. Because obviously, basically ask any Democrat in the House And they will say climate's very important. But Scott has one of the most ambitious and well thought out policies out there. And what motivated him to really be at the forefront of this fight with such a vast legislative agenda? So we will also be talking about that. Quick caveat, Scott might be a few minutes late. He is currently voting on the House floor. So that takes precedence over joining a Twitch stream, unfortunately. So if he is a few minutes late, that is fine. We will just have to bide our time. He's in the waiting room. So don't have to worry about that. And then after Representative Scott Peters joins, we'll be talking to Noah Smith at around 8:10 about his climate work and his climate pieces that he's put out very recently. So with that, I'm going to put on the BRB screen. I'm going to talk to Scott, make sure logistically we have everything to go, and we are going to be back in about a minute or two.
I can now. Can you hear me? Good. Nice to see you. My pleasure. Great. We're going till 8, right? Okay. And the format is mostly questions, right? Okay.
Representative Scott Peters, hello.
Hey, nice to be with you tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. So I'm first just going to ask you, for those who are not aware, who you are, what your background is, and what your current legislative fights are in the House of Representatives.
You want me to say that? I'm Scott Peters. I represent California's 52nd district, which is San Diego. It's a beautiful area. It's powered by 4 economies. The military, a pretty strong 20% of our jobs, science and technology, the life sciences, the border, which is important for us for trade, as well as for our relationship with Mexico, and tourism and the visitor industry, which has been hammered in the pandemic. I fight for all those things, and I'm also taken on as a personal project in terms of national issues, the environment and climate. And I'm looking forward to talking about that tonight. I think it's a very important project, and I really like where we are right now. It's a huge time of opportunity.
And that's what the topic is tonight. I want to ask you why climate is such a top priority for you. And that might sound like a silly question as a Democrat yourself, because I would assume basically every Democrat in Congress thinks it's an important issue and it's at the top of their minds. But I think few members of Congress have such a well thought out and broad climate agenda. What made this such a top issue for you, and what motivated you to put out as many legislative proposals as you have on the issue?
Yeah, I mean, I practiced environmental law before I got into politics. I've always cared about the environment. And when I was in practice, I always liked, I love trying cases. It was really fun to try cases to a jury. But often that was not the best way to go for your client. Often it was better to figure out a way to settle the case and solve the problem. So I really like the problem solving part of environmental law. I went into local government, and now I'm in Congress. While I was in San Diego, between political gigs, I chaired something called the Climate Initiative at the San Diego Foundation. We provided philanthropic support for good local decision making around climate, and we engaged the scientists at Scripps Oceanography to do some research on what would be the effects on San Diego. And it'd be no surprise to you, sea level rise, extended drought over the state of California, and more intense wildfires. And we experienced those wildfires. We're starting to see the effects of sea level rise in our Navy facilities and our beaches. And it became very personal to me, but also it is analytically, one of the existential threats. We've got nuclear weapons out there that could do a lot of damage, but climate change is kind of on the march. And I put the interests of San Diego first, but it coincides with dealing with climate change, and I think it's a really important thing to work on. And I like bringing what I think are my talents to the problem, and really trying to work on this very, very important science project.
What have been, so we're going to dive into several of your specific proposals because you have several pieces of legislation you've introduced in the past. Have there been any specific academic inspirations? You cite Scripps, obviously, but any other organizations or research that you've read has really pushed you in this direction? Our audience really loves that wonky aspect of this, so I'm curious to see what's really inspired you.
Oh, so you'll love this. I'm often on a plane, and I was reading the paper, and I read the op-ed. An op-ed in the New York Times about short-lived climate pollutants. These are methane, black carbon, and hydrofluorocarbons, which are coolants. And they're short-lived because they don't persist in the atmosphere like carbon dioxide, right? So the bad thing about them is that they're many multiples worse for global warming than carbon dioxide in the short run. But the good thing is they don't persist in the environment. So if you can stop emitting them, you can really retard the pace of climate change really pretty dramatically. And I thought it was really interesting. And I looked down at the bottom, and it was a guy named Ramanathan at University of California, San Diego, UCSD. So he was right in my backyard. And so I called him up, talked to him about this. I put a bill in called the Super-Pollutants Act, sort of to raise the profile of these pollutants in the federal government. And, it was back then, the Republican Congress. I got no Republican co-sponsors, but kept at it. And now I'm working a lot on methane as a result of that. But I'll just tell you one story. I got a call from Ram. We call him Ram, Professor Ramanathan. We call him Ram. And he called me, and he said one day, he says, I'm on the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. We advise Pope Francis on environmental issues. And he says, I'm taking Jerry Brown to speak in Rome at the Vatican. And Kevin De Leon, who's then the head of the Senate, state Senate in California, says, I need a member of Congress. Do you think you'd be able to tear yourself away and come to Rome? And I said, Ram, I think we can make that happen. So I got to go meet him. Go with him and speak to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences about what was wrong with Congress and climate, but also, met a number of people, academics all over the world that we've been engaged with. We've also talked extensively to Stanford Woods about sea level rise and about wildfires. And the fun thing about this job is that access to information is pretty readily available to a member of Congress. So it's a really rich area to mine. And we've leaned heavily on academics in doing our work.
So you mentioned super pollutants, so I'll skip ahead and go to that question.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about what they are and the threat that they pose to our climate. What specific legislative actions are you proposing to curb their emissions?
First, last year we passed two of the most significant climate bills since I've been in Congress, and they didn't get a lot of attention because they got stuffed into the end of the year spending package. One of them was on hydrofluorocarbons, these coolants. Nerds will really remember there was a Kigali agreement that would bring the numbers down over time. We had a sort of confluence of really good things happen. One was Democrats obviously were interested in dealing with this. The world was interested in dealing with it, but it turned out that the industry started to get scared that if we didn't set our standards to move away from these climate agents toward better coolants, that the rest of the world would beat us in terms of competition, business competition. So the industry came on board, and we were able to get Republicans to join us and pass this bill. So that was one specific thing that really is going to make a huge difference. Now I'm working on methane, and methane. Most of the methane that comes to the atmosphere comes from leaks from the natural gas system. So whether it's at production at fracking or in the transmission lines or the distribution to each house, those leaks are extremely dangerous for the planet. In fact, we think that 25% of warming today happens from methane emissions.
Wow.
So some other good things have happened that helped us build friends. We noticed that France canceled a contract to export liquefied natural gas from Brownsville to France. $7 billion 20-year contract because they think American natural gas is too dirty. They think it's dirty because we don't sweep up our methane. So the Obama administration had issued regulations for new gas sources that were repealed by the Trump administration. I want to go even further. I want to set up a European-style performance standard system that would divide the gas delivery system into 5 segments, tell EPA to reduce the amount of methane that can come out of those segments over time, and really get a control of methane. The other reason that's important, I think, in terms of international relations, we're not going to be able to tell people in the Paris Agreement what to do about cleaning up their act unless we clean up our act. This is the biggest thing we can do right now. I spoke about this actually last week in Houston to the Energy Security Forum. I went to the Lion's Den. I was the only Democrat to appear at this forum. It was like a zoo animal, but it was really good. We talked to oil and gas, and I said, I know that oil and gas isn't going to go away overnight. There's a lot of pretend talk, and a lot of the people who are the most avid climate activists go home and make their herbal tea with gas stoves. I know that's not going away, but you guys got to clean up your act. The world will not tolerate this dirty natural gas, nor will the political climate. And so we're starting to make an appeal to industry. Once industry feels that we're on the right track in terms of the method of regulation, I think this will come together as well, like on HFCs.
That's a fascinating answer, because I feel like methane is just one of those things that does not get enough time in the public consciousness, or even in the media, because it's just we've put in our mind that carbon is at the forefront of the fight, and it is, but there's also significant challenges that we can face that are, according to you, like legislative fixes that we can make if there's the will to do it.
Well, the thing about the climate fight is it's not one answer. I mean, you've got to decarbonize all these different sectors of the economy. You got to come up with a pricing mechanism. You've got to deal with foreign policy. You've got to deal with carbon capture. So one aspect of it is you got to deal with short-lived climate pollutants, like methane. The other one, by the way, is black carbon, which is a byproduct of wildfires now. These wildfires which are exacerbated by climate change, are turning it over and generating more black carbon, which is black soot. And that's also a tremendously dangerous climate pollutant. So getting control of wildfires is kind of the next project I have in my horizon.
You teed up my next question too by mentioning carbon pricing. You're a co-sponsor on the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. This would place a gradually increasing price on carbon emissions, and the revenues would be paid out equally to each American as a monthly rebate. Why do you believe that placing a fee on carbon is the right way to approach this problem? And specifically, why then do you want to give the money back to Americans?
So that's a great question. And I want to start by saying, the straw man that everyone says is, oh, a fee on carbon won't replace regulation. And I agree with that. I mean, there's some things like investing in research for next generation technologies, like dealing with methane, which is too cheap to clean itself up on its own. We're going to have regulations. But if we don't give an economic signal to every actor in the economy, from the biggest corporation to the regular homeowner, that they need to move away from carbon, we will fail. This planet will not survive. This is an indispensable component of a climate strategy to save the planet. And there's lots of ways you could do it. In California, we have a cap and trade system that sets a certain level of pollution that will be allowed globally, and then lets people bid for their part of it. And that limit can be reduced over time, and those permits can be more expensive. As people move to substitutes, you'll move off of carbon. The other way to do it is a carbon tax, or a price on carbon that's per BTU. Frankly, we had testimony, people used to usually say it should be around $45. We had testimony at the committee that even if you'd started with $15, it would provide an incentive, and it would provide a signal for people to start investing in the right way. So this is one version of a carbon price that I'm on, which collects the money and rebates it all. So in theory, there's no economic impact on anybody, because you'll be able to have money to cover your increased energy prices, but you'll still have that incentive day to day to get a better car, drive less, turn the heat down or whatever, because that energy will be that much more dear. I think a lot of people think that sort of the bottom third of the economy should be rebated, because there are people who can't afford higher energy prices, and that the rest of the money could be invested in infrastructure, which we're talking about now, or research. There's lots of ways to do it. People ask me what carbon pricing mechanism I support. My answer is usually the one that the Republicans will vote for, that we can get passed. And I think if you talk to Resources for the Future, for instance, they think it can be styled, basically any mechanism can be styled to work, but we don't save the planet without carbon pricing. The other thing I would just say is we're very comfortable as a country for paying for infrastructure by raising the gasoline tax. Well, that's a carbon tax anyway. That's a tax on fuel. It's just a clumsier one, and it's less specific. What we want to do is move that same concept upstream, so that you still have an energy levy, but it's a technology neutral. It sends a technology neutral signal to the economy that each person can figure out how to substitute for these carbon things, because they become more expensive. And it's just got to be part of the plan. Right now, the Biden administration is not in love with this. They've made a promise that no one's taxes will go up if you make less than $400,000. I respect that. We all have to compromise. But even the Republicans call gas tax a user fee and not a tax. So I'm willing to engage in that semantic definition if it saves the planet.
We all know that there have been some semantic revisions in the past few weeks in various debates in this country.
Right.
So
right. Bipartisanship, infrastructure, right.
I think carbon tax can get its rebrand too as a carbon fee. I'm up
right.
for that. Is there a political argument for the dividend? Like, obviously, giving money to Americans and increasing the welfare of Americans is good. I think it's pointed out that like most Americans will benefit from a carbon fee by the dividend. Is that an essential part because you want to return money to Americans because you just believe that's intrinsically good, or do you believe that's politically necessary to get this kind of legislation over the line?
I think there's a policy and a political component to it. I mean, no one likes having their taxes raised. They don't want their gas prices to go up. I get that. So you cushion that blow by saying, okay, we're going to give that money back to you, and so effectively your taxes won't have gone up. We're just moving this in a different way. I think in terms of policy, I think of folks who've invested large amounts of money in capital equipment and farming, for instance, and they're kind of stuck with that investment for a while. I think they should have an off ramp that matches that. I think that's a real hardship. And I think that there are hardships that can be accommodated and ought to be accommodated throughout the economy. But I think the essential thing is that every economic actor, everyone is making a choice about how much energy to use and what energy to use, has an incentive to move away from these climate agents. And I don't see a way to do that without a fee. I would say one other thing about it, Colin, is the the rest of the world sees this. When I went to COP25 in Madrid, I was fortunate enough to be invited by the speaker to accompany her. We heard the same thing from heads of states as we did from scientists, which is you need to have a fee on carbon, some price on carbon, whether it's cap and trade or a fee. And we face the prospect that the tariffs may be imposed against us because we will be seen as undercutting that regime. And again, I just don't think we can show our face at the Paris conference, with all our righteousness, if we're not willing to make the changes and that are going to that the rest of the world is willing to make. We have to be leaders, and this has got to be part of it.
And I think this goes back to your point earlier about this is a multi-pronged problem. We can't just attack one thing, we have to attack multiple.
Right.
And I think one of the things that a carbon tax gets at, especially a dividend that hopefully reduces the burden on people paying this tax, is that it's broad. It's going to affect every American. It's going to force every American to reduce their carbon emissions. Maybe not force, incentivize, actually. Incentivize them to reduce their carbon emissions. But most people are going to come out on top by the way that this fee is structured. So
very well could happen. By the way, I just say that politically, when we talked a few Congresses ago with some of our Republican friends who really wanted Paul Ryan to step up and allow us to do an infrastructure bill and pay for it with a gas tax. And their polling showed that even in the reddest districts, people were very supportive of a gas tax as long as they knew that the money was going to actually go into roads and bridges. The accountability was the essential thing there. I think we could make that same marriage this time with an upstream carbon fee.
And you said that that your dividend, all the money that's raised by the fee, is going to go back to Americans as a dividend. Do you think there is a case that a certain amount of that money should go to R&D, should go to green technology by the U.S. government, should go to other programs such as infrastructure that might make the country greener?
Yes, I think there is a case, and a lot of people feel that way. As I said, the most important thing for me is to get that incentive in the economy, so I'll support what can get passed. Mm-hmm. But often I think people say, let's use part of this to fund infrastructure, so that maybe the higher income folks would feel the levy, or to fund research. As you said, I think there's a lot of technology research we need to do in storage and in materials that could be funded by these revenues as well. But I think there's flexibility in it. I guess I would say there's a real consensus that the folks at the bottom should be cushioned, and the folks maybe in disadvantaged communities like farming communities should be given an off-ramp.
Another fascinating part of one of your proposals that I feel like really does not get enough coverage by anyone is your proposal to push carbon capture as an important technology in the carbon fight. You introduced the Use It Act last Congress, which authorizes $35 million in prize funding, which I'm going to ask you what prize funding is because it's a little vague for people who aren't aware of the concept, and $50 million towards research and development of those technologies. What are the benefits of well, actually, let's take a step back. What is carbon capture, and why is it important in the fight against climate change?
And so I don't forget, that's the other important bill that passed as part of the year-end spending. The Use It Act was incorporated into the year-end spending. So carbon capture, so the UN told us that if we did all the decarbonizing that we could imagine, took carbon dioxide out of got to net neutral, or got to, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. If we took all the carbon out of the economy, we still wouldn't survive unless we were able to figure out ways to pull the carbon back out. Now, there's natural ways to do that: afforestation, making sure that there's plenty of trees, the health of the ocean. Ocean pulls a lot of carbon naturally. Soils can be better tilled. Root systems can be modified. So there's natural things that you can do. But part of it is engineering. So there's one concept called direct air capture, which is a machine you stick up in the air and it pulls carbon out. We already have that technology. It's just can't do it at scale because it's too expensive. So that's the kind of technology we want to be able to develop. There are physical limits to how much carbon you can store, but also you can create markets for it in industrial processes. So we know that oil recovery already uses it. It actually ends up with cleaner gasoline when they use it. So it was kind of a benefit, although there are people on the left who say anything having to do with gasoline you shouldn't support. But again, gasoline is going to be with us for a while, so we should make it cleaner. But carbon capture is the notion that we will pull, call it negative emissions. We would pull emissions that are in the air out of the air. The UN tells us that that would be a good thing to work on so that, in the coming decades, we have that technology available.
And when you say that you want to use prize funding, what does competitive prize funding mean in the context of your carbon capture proposal?
So the prize is, it's usually set up by the agency, but they'll give prizes to people who can come up with technologies that meet these standards. We do it a lot in defense, and it's one of the tools we use to get the private sector jazzed up about doing research and competing for it. And so, that's a decent amount of money, $35 million for prizes.
Small in the context of the federal government, but
Yeah.
possibly
Right.
game changing for a
Right.
private company that's able to win that prize.
Right. I guess so. If you're a private company out there and you say, well, I can win a $10 million prize, and you've already got an idea, it might be worth playing it out. And so, it's a lot more efficient too than like trying to put a Craigslist ad out and figure out who answers. Put real money out there, you might get some responses.
Um, it also has to be stated that like the fight against climate change is a global fight. I think the United States only contributes about like 13% of global emissions.
Right.
It's falling as Asia and Africa industrialize and contribute more and more carbon to the atmosphere. So we could go net zero or even net negative emissions tomorrow, and it still would not prevent
Yep.
catastrophic climate change. How do you approach this idea that climate change is a global problem? What policies can we pursue that make this a global fight, and we bring our partners abroad into it in places like Africa and Asia?
Well, I think first of all, I want to. I don't have not mean to have do not mean to have demeaned in any way the participation in the Paris Agreement. I think it's crucial that we be at the table and we be talking to people and we be leading. So, in terms of foreign policy, let's first be a good example to the rest of the world and show, as California has, that you can get cleaner and you can make money at the same time, that prosperity and environmental quality are not at odds. Two specific foreign policy things we have to pursue are the preservation of forests and we have to fight deforestation. At various times, people have come up with incentives to keep people in Brazil and in the rainforest from cutting them down. I think we have to redouble that effort, and keeping those are carbon capture facilities. Really, those rainforests alive and healthy is really important for the planet. The other one is how we deploy power. So the rest of the world wants to have power, and we can't deny them that. And in fact, we should support that. But we should be engaged in what power they consume. There's a lot of, right now, West Virginia coal is very expensive and gas has competed it. But in India, coal is still very cheap to get at. So we have to work to offer them an alternative. And I support basically anything. Obviously, nuclear power, I think, is a particularly next generation nuclear power is a good option. Where there's not grids and we want to do distributed energy, solar and wind, we should be supporting the deployment of that. I even think liquefied natural gas can be part of the answer. If it's displacing coal, it burns better. As long as we don't spread methane, it's a better choice. I don't say it's a perfect choice, but perfect can't be the enemy of the good. Better has to be the enemy of the perfect and or of the bad. But I think that engaging in energy deployment around the world is really important for us. China seems to be off of coal just because of a lot of the air quality concerns, but I don't think they're above exporting it to other people. And certainly, it's going to be very tempting for people because it's the cheap option, and we have to through our foreign policy, we have to support better options for the planet.
Do you think making imports more expensive by doing a border adjusted carbon tax is something that should be part of the fight against climate change?
Yeah, I think actually that matches up with a border climate fee. Is we can't let people import their way around it. So I think that's part of it. I think also that's what Europe's thinking too when they think of us. If they're going to be imposing these costs on their own members, they're going to have an adjustment against us if we're not, because we would be, I think, considered to be competing unfairly. And I'm gonna try to raise that when I meet the trade representative who's just been appointed, because I think that this is a really crucial. This should be a part of our thinking when thinks in terms of world trade and foreign relations.
It really can't be denied, though, that climate change is currently happening, and one of the important things is figuring out how we adapt now. So what do you think about just the question of how do we make ourselves more resilient to climate change? If we know that climate change is happening now, more forest fires are happening, weather is more extreme already, it's likely going to get worse before it gets better, regardless of what policies we put in place tomorrow. What can we do now just to make our society more resilient, our infrastructure more resilient to these negative effects of climate change?
I think we are really challenged to predict what's going to happen. But I'll tell you, for instance, as an example, one thing that worries me is going to be the availability generally of water in California. The snowpack used to be our reservoir. It's now at 20% of historic levels. I think we may have to build a bunch of ponds to capture runoff before it goes into the ocean. I think that may be one of the things we have to do. I think that actually may be more important than building the pipes that Jerry Brown envisioned from the north to the south. Obviously, we're going to have to think about, this is already happening in Virginia. The military bases are underwater a lot of the time. What do you do about that? What do you do about protecting Manhattan? Manhattan is tremendously vulnerable to sea level rise. And they figured out in Superstorm Sandy to get the generators out of the basement. That's progress, but we're just going to see more and more of that. I got one harsh thing that I'm pursuing that people don't like, but I think is really important, which is reforming flood insurance. Right now, the federal government, you get washed out, the federal government pays you to rebuild, and they don't really make you move. So my inclination is that, you put that risk on the private people. You say, okay, we're going to bail you out one time. But I think the bill that I have on flood insurance reform says that, if you're in a building in a floodplain, we're not going to cover you after 2026 for buildings built after 2026. Now that sounds harsh, but what's the alternative? You can't keep building there. And the federal government ought to be assisting people to moving to higher ground. But, it's gonna change a lot. I think, I guess the other thing that I don't really have an answer to, but I see on the horizon is climate migration around the world. I know that the Defense Department is very concerned about the conflict that comes from things like that they feel that the drought in Syria is what caused a lot of the disintegration of that society. And that we're going to see more and more of that with so many billions of people living on the coastline in places like Bangladesh. But it's going to be more than just losing a few tourist spots. It's going to be people really losing their homes and having no place to go. So I don't have an answer for that, but I do think if you told me, you asked me what kept me awake at night, that's one of the things I worry about.
I'm going to follow up with a tough question, and I'm curious to hear your response, because I think you've been hinting at it. Does there need to be a trade-off between quality of life and fighting climate change? Because I think one of the things that really turns people off from really getting engaged in this fight is they hear, if I'm going to fight climate change, then my taxes are going to go up, and I'm not going to be able to eat burgers, and I'm not going to be able to drive my truck, and that's awful. Do you think that trade-off has to exist, or do you think your proposals, or just the fight in general, makes that trade-off kind of fake, and people are inventing something that doesn't exist?
Well, I don't think we should misunderstand the baseline. I mean, things are going in the wrong direction. If we don't act, they're going to get worse, and they're going to get more expensive, frankly. I mean, the notion that doing nothing is the cheaper option is really exactly opposite, is that now we have to invest now to keep things from going bad. I also, I'm not a person who says you have to give up your burgers, but we'll probably have to come up with better ranching decisions and ways to control methane off of cows. That may make beef a little bit more expensive, but again, that's a price signal that maybe we would want to take, and maybe those of us who are worried about our heart health might not be eating as much beef anyway. But I just think that the baseline is pretty dismal. So I would say, it's a false choice to say that we can have today's standard of living by doing nothing and avoid making these sacrifices. The sacrifices and the smart thinking are what's going to make it better. The other thing I would just say too is I'm a little concerned about the characterization of the climate fight as a jobs program. It's a science project. It's a science project that will create jobs, but it's also like, if you imagine when we went to the moon, we didn't think first about the jobs. We thought about like how to build that machine that would actually get all the way to the moon and then would bring those people back safely and land in the ocean. I just encourage us to focus on that. And then I think that benefits will come from that as well. So I do think that there's a lot of economic opportunity that we talk about that we would lose if we didn't invest. But I don't want to get sidetracked from the notion that this is really a complicated science project first and foremost.
I have one final question myself, and then I'll punt to the audience questions. We have several really good ones that I want to serve you. You've done a lot of work on housing too.
Uh-huh.
How does the fight for better housing, for more dense housing, also play into the climate fight?
So I love this issue, and I was a city council president in the 2000s, and it used to drive me crazy that the environmentalists would come and testify against every housing project, because the whole idea of if you didn't build it here, it was going to sprawl out. We saw it before our eyes in San Diego that things went further and further out. You had to build longer pipes. You took out habitat. You had more people on the roads, and meanwhile you had these surface parking lots that every once in a while, when you got the guts to redevelop them, would be so much better. And I think finally people are on board. I'm really proud of the YIMBY movement in San Diego, which I helped found. The Yes in My Backyard movement, because
I did not know that you helped found San Diego YIMBY. That is a fantastic piece of trivia I did not know.
Oh yeah, no, I was at the opening party. I had too many glasses of wine, so I gave a little bit off the cuff speech, but it's fun. But I was really excited because now the enviros are fully on board with building housing, doing infill housing, whether it's market rate or designated affordable, just because that's the way you're going to fight the environmental fight. Plus, we've got wildfires now that are illustrating in a really harsh way that that's not really a hospitable place to put housing either. So I just think it's great. There's a lot of work in California yet to do, but I think housing is it's always been the bigot for California. I mean, this may be different in Southern Ohio. For California, the availability of housing is the main obstacle to the continued prosperity of the state, in San Diego, and I think statewide. And so the answer is to use these areas where there's already concrete and make better neighborhoods out of them. I did a project I'm pretty proud of roundabouts in Bird Rock, which is the southern part of La Jolla, where we remade a 67-foot wide piece of concrete, 7 lanes, that through a neighborhood where a block from either side of the boulevard, you couldn't get a house for less than $2 million. Little tiny houses, right? But people wouldn't go on the boulevard because it was dirty, it was dangerous, it was ugly. Cars were going highway speeds. One person got killed, and I, as part of my campaign for city council, I said we're going to fix that boulevard. We're going to slow traffic, and we went back and forth. I did a little tweet on this. You could look it up in response to a story on roundabouts on Freakonomics Radio, which I love. But we ultimately came up with a plan for 5 modern roundabouts. We built a bunch of housing that helped pay for it, about 138 units. And today, I'm really proud of the neighborhood. We built more housing. We used some of that money to reconfigure the boulevard to do roundabouts. So it slowed it down. They have native landscaping. It's a really cool place to hang out now. And lo and behold, we put housing in there. It didn't ruin it. It wasn't like we put a nuclear power plant in there. We put a nice housing development, and I think that's the kind of thing we would like to do more of.
And do you think that the fight for dense housing also, I mean, one of the key arguments is just like it's good for the environment. It requires people to travel less. If you can put an apartment building next to a place where people work, they don't have to drive. They can walk or they can bike.
You might be able to walk. Exactly right. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why, like, if you look at the maps of places that have the highest carbon emissions, it's normally the exurbs around major cities. It's Long Island, it's Westchester, it's New Jersey, it's the suburbs of LA. And the cities themselves are the lowest places because people just walk, bike, or take mass transit.
It's funny. I also saw like New York had the healthiest cardiology report because people walked and they walked fast. And that's the best way to get around. But there's a lot of benefits to it, but clearly it is the answer. I think one of the biggest answers to using less carbon is to keep people out of their cars, give them a choice. And who also loves that is seniors who want to downsize. They want a place where they want to be able to walk to the grocery store, to the coffee shop. And we don't give them enough choices as well. So it's like a lot of young people, in their 20s and 30s and seniors are looking for that option. And there's demand for it. We could give that to them.
As a native New Yorker who in DC feels like he walks way too fast compared to the rest of the people here, I appreciated that comment. I'm glad to know that my heart is going to do well because of my New Yorkerness.
Good for you.
We will now move on to the questions from the audience. We already have several, but as we go through these, if people in the audience have any further questions, place them in, and Jeremiah will be picking out the best ones to put in the queue. So our first one from one of the viewers asks, what role should nuclear play? I know you mentioned about how it's an important international component, but I think there is some controversy over what role it should play domestically. What do you think of nuclear domestically, building new nuclear power plants, maintaining the existing ones, all of that?
I also turn to the UN, who advise us that most paths to net zero involve nuclear power. So in theory, it's great. It generates a ton of money. It generates a ton of power, baseload power. It's always on. We've obviously had some problems with it. If you think of Fukushima, we look at next generation nuclear. It produces a lot less spent fuel, and I think that there's improvements we could make with this notion of small modular reactors. I think we have to look at it. So we have a bill that my caucus, the New Dems, supported. That's trying to be supportive of the development of that. And we'd like it to be better than 1950s nuclear, but the technology is kind of hard to turn away from entirely if you want to achieve the goal of net zero emissions.
The next question from one of the viewers asks, how do you make sure that the infrastructure bill that is currently working its way through the White House and through Congress and is being debated publicly doesn't end up increasing carbon emissions?
That's a good question. I don't have the feeling that it will. I have the feeling that Mayor Pete, now Secretary Pete, is really on top of this in terms of transportation. I hear a much more emphasis about fixing Amtrak and doing mass transit and supporting operations in a way that's really committed to it. I don't have any problem with maintaining existing roads. I think that's appropriate. I don't see a lot of talk about building new roads, which I think is always the concern. So I could be researched away from this, but it seems to me so far like this is a very climate friendly approach to infrastructure. The other thing is, I would say two things that people argue about whether they're infrastructure, and there's a whole debate about what's infrastructure, and it's a little Orwellian to say childcare is infrastructure, but I think that the electric grid and broadband are infrastructure. Broadband is obviously enabled people to work from home in a way that we hadn't imagined, to do telemedicine in a way that that keeps people off the roads. And rural broadband has always been a demand of Republicans whose constituents aren't hooked up. Now we know that it's more than that the digital divide is not entirely geographic, that there's people in cities who don't have the same access. And I think there's a real interest in closing that gap. And in this instance, information is opportunity, but it's also the ability to work from home and not drive places, which maybe if you're in a remote place would save a lot of carbon. The grid too. There's a lot of reasons why people want to upgrade the grid. We environmentalists want to make it more efficient. We want to make it more renewable. I have a bill on the macro grid, which is the idea, if you connect the two major grids, I don't know if Texas wants to play, the East and West. We know from a study at the Energy Department that would enable renewable energy to get from where it is, like Arizona, to where it needs to be, like Detroit. We know that it would also save consumers a lot of money. I think there's a reason for that. The Republicans want to make it more secure from cyber attacks. Well, that's great. We can do that too. But I think that there's a lot of interest in making sure that the grid can accommodate the electrification of the transportation industry. And so I think it's pretty climate friendly as far as I can tell.
We have a question from Jacob and several other viewers who've asked basically the same thing. What can get passed in the area of the filibuster? Obviously, you're in the House, but anything that you pass has to take into consideration what's going on with the filibuster in the Senate. Is anyone in the GOP open to the ideas that you've put forward or the proposals by other Democrats?
I have to say I don't know. I love the bipartisan stuff, and I think episodically that Republicans. Oh, well, let me say it. Republicans are more open to it now. In 2018, it was very apparent that for the first time, people were voting on the environment. So the environment has always polled well, but there was never any sense that it was the reason why a person pulled a lever for a particular individual. They voted on jobs or something else, or immigration. It looks like that one of the biggest growing sectors of the environmental vote, which is young evangelicals, this is a real issue for them. And so now I know Republicans want to play. Bruce Westerman issued the Trillion Trees Act. He's a Arkansas rep who's got a forestry degree from Yale. It's kind of a 5-cent answer to a $10 problem, but it's something. We had people on carbon capture. We know people want to do research. That stuff can all get passed, and it did pass last year. We passed a carbon capture bill, and we passed a HFC's bill that was supported by industry. So there was a sort of a permission there, I think, for them. So now I think also that, we hear that Republicans want to do infrastructure. And I think, there's at least $1 trillion of hard infrastructure in that bill that we would consider infrastructure, including broadband and the grid. They've also signed a pledge that says, Grover Norquist pledge that says, I'm not going to allow anyone's taxes to be raised. I raised this on my rare appearance on Fox with Neil Cavuto. He said, well, yeah, but Republicans are okay with fees, like gas fees, like user fees. And so would they support a user fee increase to do infrastructure? I think maybe they would. And I really respect the president for trying to play that out, because the biggest issue for the country is the division among us rather than any specific policy issue. And I think Joe Biden's a guy who knows how Democrats and Republicans used to work together. Maybe you could do that, but if it doesn't happen, we'll have to go through reconciliation, which allows us to fix the tax system. I think that could pass with just Democrats, and it makes it harder for us to do policy issues, but funding issues we can do. So I think we'll know by the end of May whether Republicans are going to be serious about this, and whether President Biden is going to value bipartisanship when he makes a deal, and whether he's willing to cut his requests in order to get something that's bipartisan. Frankly, I'd like to fix the climate and the democracy. And this is a moment when we're going to find out about it. Republicans are pretty pressured by the right, like we are by the left, and they're all scared of their primaries. So that would their consultants are all telling them not to do any climate stuff. we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I think you really had like a hopeful message in that, is that young people, regardless of the party today, are
Yeah.
just growing up as caring about the climate in at
Right.
least some sort of fashion.
Right. Yeah.
And I think if it's not now, time is not on the side of the Republican position on climate, and we're going to see a shift
Right.
towards.
And last night, coincidentally, I was on the Evangelical Environmental Network, where evangelical Christians are advocating for saving God's planet from climate change. One of the most important climate scientists is a woman named Catherine Hayhoe at Texas Tech, who's an evangelical Christian. And she started teaching us how to talk to Republicans about it. And it's a values discussion, right? It's not we don't talk about statistics. We don't talk about polar bears. We talk about what's the right thing to do for your children and for God's creation. And that's a frame in which you can get to climate action. It's not the same as, what I might hear most often in San Diego, but if it gets us to the same policy, I will take it any day.
Fully on board with that, and it rings similar to I don't know if you saw it. Um, Mayor Pete or Secretary Pete, I guess,
Yeah,
was on Jake Tapper and made a comment about vaccines, saying the same thing, that it might be God's will to get vaccinated. And I think that kind of messaging would benefit Democrats for the issues they care about.
Pete's pretty good at that Indiana Christian talk. I think he's actually really good at it. He gets it, and I think he's got a good ear for it.
We have a question from Tobin. Do you think we should be doing more to push for new rules on methane leaks, like the rules implemented in Colorado by John Hickenlooper?
Yes, I do, and I think so what we're going to do now, you'll see us vote on a CRA, which I can't remember what it stands for, but it's the way we snatch back a regulation from the last administration. So we're going to undo the undoing of the Obama methane rule. The Obama methane rule was a new source rule, so it required you to use certain compressors and pumps in your new gas facilities, wherever they were. And that's fine. I think it's better than nothing. They had not regulated existing facilities yet. So the ones that are most likely to be leaking, they had to still go through another round of regulation. My bill would be a performance standard that would measure leaks and then require companies to fix them where leaks were determined, or require them not to allow those leaks, and would give some flexibility to the industry to figure out the best way to do that. And it's the way the Europeans are approaching it. I think it would be a lot cleaner way, like literally and figuratively, to do it. And I think the industry would be more open to it, which makes it more likely to pass. So I just really can't tell you, though, what a high priority this is for me and for the planet. I think it's really important that we do this. Again, 25% of current warming, when you see ice melting, it's not so much carbon dioxide, which is going to affect us over time. It's not just carbon dioxide, but 25% of it is methane pollution. And it's a huge target. And if we got a hold of it, like I said, because it doesn't persist, it make a huge difference.
We have a question from someone who, presumably based on the specificity of their question, is from San Diego, and they ask, why did San Diego shut down the only nuclear power plant in Southern California, and how did you feel about that decision?
I feel ambivalent about it. I think there was still life in it. And it wasn't San Diego that shut it down. They had a problem with the cooling system that was legitimate. There was no evidence of a leak, and it was a multi-billion-dollar thing to fix. And they were going to be in litigation with Mitsubishi, who made it. I think what scared them off, and they decided to close it, was the permitting that they faced from the state. And so they just thought it was too daunting and too uncertain for them to go forward. And so San Onofre will be closing, and now we're trying to figure out what to do with the waste. So I'm, that cut a lot into our clean emissions, because we have to produce that from someplace else. And the problem of intermittent power from solar and wind, you need to do something for storage, not just batteries, but batteries are what we think of, or high voltage interstate transmission, like the macro grid, I think would help too. But when nuclear was already there, I think there's some, it's something of a loss that it shut down before its capacity was used.
Let's see. The next question is from Jeremiah. Some pundits like Noah Smith at Bloomberg downplay both the impact of carbon taxes and the political possibility of them. He thinks that is better in theory than in practice, and we need regulations in green R&D instead, which you propose.
Yeah.
as well. What are your thoughts on what are your thoughts that carbon taxes might not be too powerful of a mechanism, and do you think that they should be prioritized over in the theoretical ranking of our most important initiatives? Would they go above regulations and investments in the green R&D, or do you think they fall somewhere in the middle or on the bottom?
So I think they're at the top. I think they're one of the two things at the top. And most economists and the National Academy of Sciences and Janet Yellen all said they support a carbon fee. I still think it's indispensable. And even in California, where, God knows if, Sacramento is so friendly to climate action, we've got a great low carbon fuel standard. We've got a mandate on utilities that they get to net zero by mid-century. But we've also got a cap and trade system to help people get there. And those things go in concert. And I think that it's folly to think that you can do without a price on carbon, an incentive in the economy. I just remember when we had a gas shock, and gas went from $2 to $4 in San Diego. All of a sudden, mass transit ridership went way up. People respond to those incentives, and I don't mean to be too anecdotal about it, but that's what economists say, and that's why I think it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between people driving less and gas prices going up is out there, and it's not them
Right.
reducing the trips they take to work. It's them substituting it or taking less leisure drive or finding alternatives.
Those lines are pretty
as
close
well.
to each other.
Yes, it's very well researched in my opinion. All right, we have one final question for you from Rachel, and it is a total softball and unrelated to our current discussion. What is the painting behind you?
Oh, so my wife buys local art. First of all, she hasn't been here in like a year and a half. I'm in DC. I'm sorry if you heard the washer go off. It is a painting by an artist here. We bought at the Torpedo Factory, and she's a modern artist. We've got two of her things. It's all local art here, and it's really nice. And I wish my wife would visit me more, but she doesn't want to get on a plane until the pandemic's over. So,
cannot come soon enough.
But thank you for noticing it. She's also like, there's these sticks that she has, and this metal piece, and it's way more than I deserve. She's very good to me.
Recommendation for anyone if you're in the DC area, go visit the Torpedo Factory in Old Town Alexandria. It is a fantastic place to walk around. There are many art studios to walk through. Might be a bit more fun post-COVID, but even during COVID, they're open for business. So I think that is it from me, and I think that's it for audience questions. I just want to thank you for coming out to do this. This is a wonderful event. You probably were not looking at the chat for this as this was going on, but when you said stuff about housing and certain stuff about carbon taxes, it just like lit up with people getting all excited about it. So,
okay, one more bill I'll tell you about: build more housing near transit. Use the leverage of the federal government to force locals to put housing near your transit project. Boost ridership and fare box recovery.
This is all red meat for our audience, but hopefully red meat that's carbon taxed.
Yeah, with that too.
So, Representative Scott Peters, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. I hope if there is ever a important development on climate, we can welcome you back again to talk about it. I think this was informative and gave our audience a new hero and someone to look forward to in this kind of debate.
If you want to be on our newsletter about what's going on in climate, just contact my office. We'll keep you posted.
Yes, that'll be wonderful. I'll let you know if anyone wants to be in touch with that. All right, well, have a good night.
Thanks,
and thank
Tom.
you again for
You
joining
will.
us. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
That was wonderful. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. I was not kidding when I said that Representative Scott Peters was a total new liberal when it came to this issue. And he's one-on-one with us when it comes to housing and when it comes to climate. And now we know that despite all the attention that other members of Congress get for their climate positions, that there are actually people who have pragmatic and practical solutions to these problems. So I hope that Representative Scott Peters continues this fight and that we will all cheer him on, because I think this is a wonderful event. But thank you all for coming and being super active in the chat. I was not looking at the numbers during it, but I'm looking now, and there's 250 on you on Twitch, and that does not count the number of people who are watching on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or any of those platforms. So thank you all for coming out. I did forget to put the disclaimer at the beginning that if you wanted to ask a question, you had to be on Twitch, but I hope some of you figured it out halfway through if you really wanted to answer a question. But the night is not over. Noah Smith is coming on the stream. He got name dropped during this. He has some counter arguments to carbon taxes that I think are interesting considering Noah's prior position on it. And I want to discuss it with him. I want to hear out what his arguments are. And talk about, like, hey, if he doesn't think carbon taxes are a good idea, then what is? And I disagree with him, but Noah's a smart guy, and I think hearing the criticisms from someone who's really right on this deserves to be heard. So give me a moment. I'm going to message Noah, make sure he gets into this Zoom room that we were just in. But I'll be right here. So just ignore me while I tee up Noah. I closed my Zoom meeting, and I shouldn't have done that because I need that Zoom meeting open. There we go. There we go. Awesome. But I hope the same for this event, that you guys have some questions for Noah. What did you think of his recent Substack piece? If you haven't read it, I'm going to drop it in the chat for those who are not aware of it. Because I think it's an important discussion, again, to have on this. So Substack, that was Smith. I'll let you guys read it. It's a quick one, even if you just want to skim it. And it's more or less a criticism of not only just carbon taxes, but climate economics as an entire field. And there was a fiery debate on Twitter about it, for those who are not aware, about whether Noah was right, whether he was missing some of the most recent research on climate economics, and what's up with carbon taxes. Because I think Noah's inspiration, and I'm going to ask him whether this was his inspiration, was Brian Deese, who was the chair of the National Economic Council in the White House. Said that, actually, no, he didn't say that. Sorry, I don't want to attribute to him. It was Ezra Klein quoting, I think, anonymous sources within the White House, or just general sentiment within the White House, that basically they viewed carbon taxes as, one, divorced from political reality, and two, to the point that they are so divorced from political reality that they are actively dangerous. Which I thought was incredibly strong words from the Biden administration. Mind you, and Scott Peters hinted at this, that this is an administration that is politically risk adverse. They pledged during the campaign that they were not going to raise taxes on people making under $400,000. And I think carbon taxes play into that. Obviously with the dividend that changes it, or we call it a fee. But there doesn't seem much political will to do a fee either, based on comments from the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. But I think it's worthy of having that discussion, because if we're not going to do a carbon tax, which economists and elected officials like Scott Peters believe are paramount in our fight against climate change, then what are we going to do? So I think Noah will have some incredibly enlightening comments. I hope he explains some of the points he made. And I hope you guys have good questions on it. I will now be able to actually pay attention to the questions myself. But I do quickly want to thank a few people for putting this event together before we move on to Noah. I want to thank Jeremiah Johnson, my co-host on this stream, who is currently moderating the chat and got the moderators and recruited some people to host us, and is moderating the questions for doing that, because it made tonight possible. It made it go smoothly. It would have been impossible to do this stream on my own. So he gets massive credit for helping out on that. Thank you, Jeremiah, because I know you are listening. I want to thank my colleague at PPI, Phil LaRue. He is our new Congressional Relations Director, and he helped put this event together, had the conversations, or initiated the conversations, and talked us through how to do this. And without him, this just would not be something that we wouldn't be able to do on our own. And likewise, I'd like to thank our press person here at PPI, Aaron White, who was fantastic in setting up this event and getting us into the right frame of mind, because Jeremiah and I are not born and bred politicos. And obviously, thank you to the Progressive Policy Institute, where we are located. The Center for New Liberalism is a project of the Progressive Policy Institute. We joined last year, and not in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be doing events like this. So it is a privilege to be a part of this organization and be doing awesome events like this. And bring people like Scott Peters to you guys, because he's someone who deserves more attention, who deserves more praise, and I hope that he gets that after an event like this. This means follow Scott on Twitter and say nice things to him when he tweets positively about his climate plan. All right. Well, Noah Smith is here. He is in the waiting room of the Zoom chat, so I'm going to go to him, talk to him about this. And just like with Scott Peters' event, we'll be back in about 1 minute. Yes, I do want to see the rabbit. This is our pre-discussion I'm having with Noah about his rabbits. Wow. We finally got rabbit content on the stream. Last time you were on, we did not get rabbit content. No, which one is that again? Hello, Cinnamon.
She's a girl. She's the first one I got. Isn't she cute?
She was friendly. I feel like bunnies are sometimes so skittish and unfriendly, and she was hanging out with you.
She's basically a cat. She's friendly, but she also like doesn't necessarily give a shit. She's just like, what's this? Who cares? I'll step on it. Now it's time to eat. Anyway, now she's eating. Here, I'll show you where she lives, where she eats.
Oh. Where's the second rabbit? Don't you have two?
Yeah, he's asleep.
Good for him.
I think they sleep during the day. I don't know why she got up. Yeah, no, he's still under the bed.
Good for him.
He usually sleeps like a little longer than she does.
So
then he really likes it under the bed. Like that's his domain, his bed.
Well, I guess when you're a small rabbit, you can do that. If you want to live under the bed and sleep under the bed, you're allowed to do that.
You can. I have a especially high bed platform too, so.
There you go. I do not, so I don't think the rabbits could fit under there.
Right.
Before we jump into the climate discussion, how's life been treating you? I feel like we haven't caught up since we talked last year. Amazing shirt.
You like
Very
that?
Based.
Thank you.
How's life been treating you during COVID?
Oh, I don't know, like pretty good. I've got this blog now, which is fun.
Yeah, your Substack's doing really well.
I mean, it's not doing really well. It's, it's, but it's not nothing.
I'm always amazed by your writing output that you're able to do a Bloomberg opinion column and your Substack. And I like, how does he do it? How do you have so much output between the two blogs?
Well, they did cut the Bloomberg output in half.
Oh, really?
Happened.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Didn't realize that.
Almost half. Yeah. It's like used to be 4 to 5. Now it's 2 to 3.
Gotcha. So now you have time to work on the Substack, I guess.
Yes. And also just there were a million things that I had ready to say that I needed to say. And I just needed to comment on things in a better form than Twitter. Because I was writing, for like 3 or 4 years, I wrote all these Twitter threads.
Yes. You're well known
since
for
like
this.
2017. I became well known for that. And I was like, oh my God, these are so limiting. And the people just don't understand them. And they're so ephemeral. And I can't put anything interesting in them. And they're so abbreviated. It's just like, I've got to get a blog again. And so and then along come the Substack people and say like, oh, why don't you do a blog where you get paid? But I didn't really care about getting paid because Bloomberg pays me plenty. But I did want the email newsletter, the free email distribution. And so now I have an email list of about 24,000 people, which today, because Matt Iglesias was kind enough to screenshot his blog, I noted my free email list is more than half of Matt Iglesias's free list.
That's pretty impressive.
And so, but my paying subscribers are much less.
You're not Substack's exclusive yet. That's the problem.
That's right. I'm not Substack exclusive. Plus, I only do one paid post a week.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's
right.
why I've been enjoying my Substack budget is like too thin between Twitch and Patreon and Substack. Right. I feel like I'm just like throwing money at people, which I love them all.
If you want a free subscription to my Substack, I'll just give it to you right now.
Oh, you do not have to do that. I'm saying that the second.
Why not? But then you'll tweet my subscribers only articles you'll like, and you'll be like, you should subscribe to this, and then like 3 people will subscribe, so the economics works out. Also,
I won't complain. If people want to give me free things, I'll always say yes.
More importantly, we're friends, and
yes, even though we're gonna probably bicker a little bit about carbon taxes and climate economics.
What's your email again?
My email is colin@colinmortimer.com.
Oh.
First name.
Oh, you have your own thing.
Yes. So all people watching on Twitch, you now have my personal email. You can send me either positive or negative fan mail.
Lol, I'll forget it in 5 seconds. Colin Mortimer is just one word, no underscores, nothing.
No underscores, no nothing.
You now have paid free paid subscription to No Opinion.
Thank you. This is actually, funnily enough, I didn't know you could give out free subscriptions. This is the second one I received today. I'm contributing to another paid Substack, and I got a free subscription. I was like, wow, I didn't know that was a concept. So I'm just collecting them all. So again, if you listeners, if you have anything free to give me, I'll also take those as well. I take all free things. But thank you, Noah.
Wait, are we on the air now?
We are. We have been on the air. So now everyone heard my
right.
email and talking about free Substacks.
Got it.
So let's talk about climate. We just had a wonderful discussion with Representative Scott Peters of San Diego, who you may or may not be aware of, but he's a Democrat. He is pro various climate programs that would make the environment better. He's also a YIMBY. I found out during it that he founded San Diego YIMBY. So he is like the perfect mishmash of,
that's awesome.
of various neoliberal agenda items. But I felt like it would be important to bring someone on who might have a different perspective on the carbon taxes, because I feel like a few years ago you were pro carbon tax. Am I mistaken in that? And you've kind of shifted.
I'm still pro carbon tax.
Oh, okay. Explain.
Yeah, I carbon taxes are good. Do a carbon tax.
So what is your specific criticism then that you make in your piece? What are you trying to get at?
Oh, so in my piece, do you want me to back up and give the whole spiel, or do you want me to just say that skip straight to the carbon tax piece?
No, give the whole spiel. I think it's important for context.
All right. So this piece harkens back to my days as a macroeconomics basher. I've officially hung up my my spurs as a macroeconomics basher, because at some point it became clear that all the young people in macroeconomics now realized what they had to do, and were addressing like essentially all the problems I had raised. And not only that, it wasn't just that, it was also that the people at the top of the field, the guys who would, pull out an RBC model to say, oh, deficits are bad, blah, blah, blah. It was clear that they were all discredited within the, halls of power, influence, whatever, and the wider intellectual community, which was that was the important thing. You got to clear the old guys out before the young guys can take over. You see what I mean? And so that had happened. When I saw that people weren't paying attention to, like Eugene Fama saying stimulus doesn't work. No one cared what Eugene Fama or Ed Prescott or Robert Lucas had to say. Robert Lucas won a Nobel Prize. No one cared what he had to say anymore. He was like, the fundamental problem of deficit prevention has now been solved. And then that was it. That was the end of Robert Lucas's influence in the halls of power. He will always have a giant gold medal, but people will not listen to him about recessions anymore. And that had to happen. I'm sorry, that seems mean. And in fact, Brad DeLong even called my climate economics post nasty on our podcast last night.
Wow. Was he against what you said, or was he just saying that it was nasty, but also correct?
I think he was, he just thought the tone was problematic. And so what happened was that I was reading about economist influence in the Biden administration, and also looking at some of the people who had been hired, who were all great hires, by the way. And essentially Biden just hired up like half of econ Twitter, and it was great. He hired all the right people, like so many great people. I can't even think of anyone I want him to hire that he didn't hire. Maybe Aaron Dubé, but I don't think he would do it. But anyway, so then there's like so many people great people that he hired. And economists, there's been this trope for years that economists were losing influence. And during the Trump administration, that was certainly true. Trump didn't pay attention to economists. Then again, Trump didn't pay any attention to anyone except Trump. But economists really did lose a lot of influence after 2008. And the kind of economists who lost influence, who are basically macroeconomists, but not just macroeconomists, but sort of these jack of all trades macroeconomists who thought that they would write down some DSGE models, but they were mostly just these kind of like all-purpose commentator macroeconomists. And that tradition really derives from Keynes, just this idea of a macroeconomist, someone who's primarily macro, but really understands everything about the economy and can just dish advice on all policy. That's clearly where Larry Summers was. And I think that those people lost a lot of currency after the Great Recession, but that doesn't mean that economics itself is now this discredited thing. So the lefties who say economics was this arm of neoliberalism, and now that's discredited, are wrong and are losing, because what's happening is that there was a shift in the economics profession. Empirical economics came to the fore, and empirical economics became far more credible. People understood a new theory, but they had a much deeper connection to data. They came of age in a time of great computing resources and great data availability and great statistical methods that had been really developed. Those three things really combined to create the age of empirical economics that we're living in now. And those people are all getting hired by the Biden administration. Economics is back. The influence of economics is climbing again. It is recovering. And yet there was one type of economist that I noticed that was getting almost completely shut out and ignored by the Biden administration. That was climate economists. And Ezra Klein remarked on this in a piece lately, and this just, I sat around thinking about this, and I had this frustration with climate economics that had been boiling for like years, basically since about 2015, that I had written about it for Bloomberg and no one paid any attention at all. And so I was like, all right, well, now that I have free non-paywall distribution, I'm going to just blast.
All controversial stuff has to go on Substack. This is now a tried and true fact.
All controversial stuff now has to go on not controversial, but anything where I say like, this is obviously banana pants, which I did. I said that about the predictions of the DICE model, the most famous integrated assessment model that won a Nobel Prize. And I said, it is giving obviously banana pants predictions, which is exactly the same thing I said about, I'm not sure I used the word banana pants, but I did.
You did not, because I would have remembered that, but I do love that adjective.
I really like the word banana pants, because you're not just bananas, you're wearing bananas for pants. And that's just not going to work. So there were all these problems I had with climate economics, both in terms of academic stuff and in terms of its applicability to the wider world. And I was just like, all right, time to put it all in one place and blast. So I did. And I think that all the things that I said were right. It got ferocious pushback by climate economists, obviously, because no one likes having their field just blasted by some blogger. Nobody likes that. And so, of course, but the main counter was like, things have changed since 2012. Lots of good stuff's getting done now, blah, blah, blah. That was the defense. And that's that defense is, it's good, because there really are a lot of young people doing smarter stuff than what was done before, cooperating with actual climate scientists a lot more than was done before, publishing even in interdisciplinary journals or climate journals even. And changing the methods to be more in concert with what we know of the science than the stuff that was done, up until 2012, 2015 is more really like when the tipping point kind of came. There was just in the last half decade is when there's been a real sea change within this profession. I didn't talk about that at all, because the point is that it's at the ground level. It's at the sort of subterranean level this change is happening. The top journals still aren't publishing climate stuff. The people who spent years and years publishing stuff about how actually climate change will improve agricultural productivity are now in positions of power, running labs, running, like working groups and stuff like that. They are still, and then all the young people, even though they're doing smarter stuff, sort of have to cite the old guys. Someone on Twitter claimed that they don't cite the old guys anymore, but they do. And so these fields take a long time to turn around. And sometimes it's as much about discrediting the old guys as it is about promoting the young folks. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what I was really trying to do. I'll write posts in the future where I'm like, okay, here's good things that are happening. Here's good things that are happening. I did the same thing with macro. But I think that first, the scale of the failure has to be recognized, and it has to be recognized by the public so that they know what the problem was and what the failure was before they can start to know about the people who've been working to fix the failure. And then I think that economists have to know what a grievous breach of trust has been created with policymakers and scientists even by decades of failure, and that can't be fixed in a few years of young people doing some better research. And so that was what it was really about. It was about telling the story of this extended and potentially catastrophic failure. The fact is, for decades, climate economists were in the business of minimizing the importance of climate change. And that is a harsher sentence than I said in the post, but that is what it was.
And when you say that, are you referring to the papers that were written saying that, like, oh, climate change is going to be good for agriculture? Is that what you're saying? Or are you just saying that the models are not good enough, that they were just understating the extent of the problem?
That's part of it as well. So there's a number of different ways in which this was done. So one of the ways is just the bad papers. And these bad papers sometimes got published in the AER. Sometimes got published by top people, and there was no way to really tell the difference between from an outsider. There's no way for an outsider to tell bad from good. They just said, oh, economist publishing in top journals says climate change isn't that bad, that was damaging, probably to the world. Because this was going on at the time of the Kyoto Protocol in the 90s and the time of the Paris Accords. And this was coloring our politics, because whenever climate scientists came in and said something that, was dire, some like Republican would come up with a climate economist. Say, actually, climate economists say blah, blah, blah. And there was this idea that climate economists were the sensible adults in the room, and that climate scientists were, wild-haired, wild-eyed, sort of freaky hippies who were just like peddling these nonsense stories about environmental destruction. Didn't we discredit that in the 70s? Humankind can always adapt. It's never as bad as you think. You're just out of touch scientists. And here come the economists who look at the big picture and are hard-headed and know about trade-offs and, aren't caught up in socialist ideology, what blah, blah, blah. Here come the economists to tell you the truth about it. And that was really the attitude in certain corners of the political debate. And in lots of the political debate, actually, Republicans would trot out climate economists again and again. And this guy, Richard Tall, who wrote all these papers and op-eds minimizing the importance of climate change, and who had a lot of influential positions and, ran a lot of stuff. He was on the Senate Republicans' official list of scientists who say climate change isn't so bad. And the research was terrible. The JEP, he wrote this Journal of Economics Perspectives article that had to put out multiple correction papers. 2 times they had to publish corrections because people just kept finding more and more problems with this paper. It's the worst paper I've ever seen. It's like, and he when he admitted to the data problems, he said gremlins had gotten into his work. Gremlins. The gremlin is you. You put that in there. You're the gremlin. And so that was the worst. That was the most egregious thing. And lots of people did push back on Tal. But the point is that the guys at the top of the field were like, not that bad, but it's impossible to be that bad. They were fairly bad, I think. Like, Deshanes and Greenstone are these guys who published all these papers. They published a paper on the mortality of climate change where they say, okay, well, here's how much people will die of heat stroke from a warmer world. And then they were like, actually, we can think of a lot of other things that could kill people from climate change, possibly very severe things and catastrophic things. It's easy to imagine these, but it's not easy to estimate those. So we didn't include those in the paper. They shoved that section in the conclusion and then published the paper, like estimating mortality from climate change, where it's just like heat stroke. That's what's going to kill us. But climate change, not fires, not floods, not diseases, not, crop failures, not migrations and wars. No, heat stroke. And it was published in the AER. That got published in the top journal. And so that kind of stuff was bad, but potentially even worse, the Nobel Prize winning DICE model, which is integrated assessment model, which is supposed to combine, scientific and economic factors, whatever, and used by the EPA, used by all these important major bodies, won a Nobel Prize, used all over the place. The DICE model basically said that the total GDP loss from climate change is minimal. So it said that the losses, the capitalized losses in terms of GDP of a 6 degrees Celsius warmer world was 10% of GDP. And that is banana pants. That is a banana pants statement, because 6 degrees of warming will destroy our world. Really bad is 2.5. Mm-hmm. 6 is just do a nuclear war instead. That's 6. And it was 10% of GDP. It turns out, here's the reason. The discount rate was high. So what Nobel Prize winning economist did was he took market interest rates, which is how much bond traders care about the future of their portfolios, and he stuck that into the social discount rate of how much we should care about future generations. Investments depreciate over 30 years. Here's something that will destroy the world in 150 years. No one cares about it. It doesn't matter at all. It's zero. It zeroes out. It's exponential decay of how much we care about this. And so that is why they came up with these that is one reason. There's other reasons too. The DICE models dramatically understated the cost of mitigation because they didn't realize the progress in green energy technologies. They didn't include tail risks. They didn't include, ambiguity aversion, all kinds of things like this. And then they got some of the science wrong too. So it turns out that when climate scientists, updated their model of the carbon cycle, it dramatically increased the cost of carbon that these models were putting out. And so then once you fixed all the things, the DICE model was spitting out 1.5 to 2 degrees C as the amount we should aim for, which is exactly what climate science has been saying for decades. And so combine this all into one. So basically I'm mad because that kind of stuff was rewarded with Nobel Prizes, massive amounts of money and prestige and elite attention, and Obama not. While the people who were yelling, Martin Weitzman was yelling, no, think about tail risks, and he was ignored. And, other people like climate scientists they weren't ignored, but every time someone trotted out a climate economist, it was to minimize the importance of climate change, the economic importance and costs of climate change. And this went on for decades and decades, and this is not the kind of thing you can sweep under the rug. So that is my post summarized briefly. We can talk about that, or we can talk about the carbon tax thing.
I do want to talk about the carbon tax thing, because I feel like that was one of the biggest points of disagreement people had with your piece, is that, and I perceive this too, but we had a discussion before you joined where you pushed back on that. I'm curious if you expand on it. I perceived it as you were criticizing carbon taxes. And Ezra Klein, in the piece that you referenced and I read as well, also said that the Biden administration is not too hot on carbon taxes. Were you criticizing carbon taxes? Are you personally anti-carbon taxes, or is there a different way to think about what you wrote in your piece?
So are you familiar with the Mott and Bailey meme?
I am very familiar with the Mott and Bailey meme. I think I deployed it yesterday.
Great. The Mott is this like goofy overreach, and the Bailey is a defensible statement you retreat to. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the Mott of the carbon tax people is that carbon tax is like our single policy that, instead of doing X, just put a price on carbon. That's the Mott. And the Bailey is actually carbon taxes are a good thing to do, so why not do them? And the Bailey is very defensible because carbon taxes are a good thing and we should do them. To repeat, carbon taxes are a good thing and we should do them. However, the idea that any given climate change policy should be replaced by a carbon tax is wrong. And I would argue that carbon taxes should not be our frontline attack against climate change, that they're a good supplemental policy, that there are things that they can do that other policies cannot. They have advantages that other policies don't have. And they're good and they're useful. And they're going to be necessary. Something like that is going to be necessary. And I can explain why. But I think that most of the decarbonization is going to come from other things that are not a carbon tax. And I can explain why. It's pretty simple. In fact, it's kind of Econ 101.
Ooh. And
you want me to Econ 101 here?
Yes, please. That was a spicy take.
Yeah. So Econ 101 says, talks about externalities, it's basically this idea that the person who pays the cost doesn't derive full benefit. So if I pay X amount of cost, I get less than X amount of benefit, and therefore I don't pay the cost. I choose not to pay the cost. This is true of carbon taxes at the national level. So if the United States were to pay $1 billion to decarbonize in some way, then it would get less than, and suppose we took the social cost of carbon for the world, suppose the proper social cost of carbon for the world is $50 per ton. And we put that and we make a $50 per ton of carbon tax. The United States will derive much less benefit from each ton of carbon it reduces than $50, if that's the true global social cost of carbon. Because China's driving benefit, and Britain's driving benefit, and India's driving benefit, and Bangladesh is driving benefit, and Kenya's driving benefit. And of course, that's good. I want the world to benefit. But it's obvious that the United States and almost no country is willing to pay that much when the benefits are external and cannot be internalized. That is Econ 101. And so this, you have seen some countries have a carbon tax, and frankly, it's not a very steep carbon tax. And you've seen some pseudo carbon tax things like cap and trade, which the cap is set very high so that in practice it doesn't really restrict carbon very much, which is equivalent to having a very low carbon tax. So, in other words, we have not seen carbon taxes as stringent as would be necessary to be a frontline first response policy against global warming almost anywhere. And despite the fact that some places have put in carbon taxes, they've been these very light little things. And when the United States has tried to do a carbon tax, it's failed, and both lefties and righties have united in opposing it. So when you saw in Washington State, you had this campaign started by Yoram Bauman, and this econ comedian guy who had me on his stand-up show one time, who is he's incredibly steeped in the culture and the milieu of the economics profession and the economics culture. And within that profession culture, carbon tax is the baby. Carbon tax is like this thing we love because it's so econ-y, because this thing whose benefit we can explain that the climate scientists can't explain. It makes us special. It makes us valuable. It makes us, have something to contribute, and everybody wants that. So economists love carbon tax just because it's their thing. Economists are, if the thing we need to do is like buy a bunch of solar power, buy a bunch of electric vehicles, what do economists have to say about that? Obviously, they do have things to say about that, but it's not the kind of like, look, I drew two graphs and then I drew this little wedge showing that we've, brought social costs in line with private costs, which is an Econ 101 thing. And so there's no carbon tax you can draw in an Econ 101 graph. Of course, that graph is implicitly a world graph, not a single nation graph or a single state graph. And on some level, the people who voted these things down and countries that have refused to implement carbon taxes, which is most countries and includes all the biggest polluters, these countries implicitly are considering this externality. They are doing the rational Econ 101 thing. It is not, we talk about economists don't understand politics, say everybody, including Ezra Klein. They're like, economists, carbon tax is good economics, but bad politics. But it's, the political economy of it is bad for the same reason, for Econ 101 reasons, for very economics reasons, which is this externality. The fact that a nation that puts the global price, the global social cost of carbon as a carbon tax in one nation is shouldering much more of the burden than they're getting out in terms of reductions of harm from climate change.
So, but what if we did something like a border-adjusted carbon tax, like Europe?
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. If Brunei did a border-adjusted sugar tax, would Americans get less fat?
No, but if America and Europe are importing a significant amount of the world's goods, and we do a border-adjusted carbon tax, wouldn't that have a significant effect on the emissions or internalize the emissions that are happening in places like Asia and Africa?
No.
Why?
Because they just don't care that much. Essentially, what we'd be doing is a steep tariff on China, whatever. It would, first of all, it would absolutely fuck up our supply chains, and we'd pay costs. So we would really pay costs for that, because
I would think we would do it gradually enough for us to smooth things over, and I say this as someone who's generally anti-tariff.
Right. It's really easy to show that border adjustment doesn't fix the issue. How much of its GDP does China export to the United States? I mean, we all think China, you have this idea in your mind of China as like this export dependent economy that lives and dies by the US market, but Trump just slapped big tariffs on like a lot of Chinese stuff. They didn't even blink. Their exchange rate adjusts. Exchange rates adjust for tariffs.
But does that imply in the carbon scenario?
Yeah, of course. You put a carbon tax. You say, okay, China, you sold us this thing. It was made with coal power, so we're going to put like a 50% tariff on it. Okay, fine, or whatever tariff. I just made that number up. 50% tariff, whatever. And China's like, okay, and yuan is now 50% cheaper. And then we just buy the carbony shit. How much do they care? They can just depreciate their exchange rates, depreciate to handle tariffs. It happened with Trump's tariffs. Look at what happened to the yuan when after Trump put his tariffs up, like it went down. And so exchange rate movements simply cancel out this price. And it's like, And even if they don't completely cancel out the price, even if exchange rates is a little sluggishness, there's a little friction, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't completely, we're talking about a very small price incentive. And finally, countries will just cheat. Who says how much carbon there is in Chinese stuff? Us or China? It's China. And they will say, oh, actually, you know, we're not putting as much carbon in there now. But it's bullshit. They are. Why wouldn't they lie? I would lie. Why wouldn't they lie? No, I wouldn't lie. Most like business people will lie and governments will lie, and China doesn't give a rat's ass about that. They'll just be like, okay, yeah, we took the carbon out, and look, costs didn't really go down, but we didn't really go up. But hey, we managed to take the carbon out, yay! And they're lying. Carbon's still getting pumped into the atmosphere, and yet they evade the tariff. So exchange rates, lying, and the fact that it's like actually not any kind of global optimum because it's like Brunei taxing sugar to try to make Americans lose weight.
So your argument is not that carbon taxes are bad, but that
Right.
Economists overstate the effectiveness of them when this is a global problem, and
Yes.
that you bring up the examples of why these why they are overstating the effectiveness of a carbon tax, and
Right.
you also talk about the border adjustment factor. So what
Right.
are you proposing that we do in addition to a carbon tax to abate climate change in places like China and Africa and the rest of Asia?
Aha. Well, the good thing is that there's a second externality in this world besides the climate externality. The other externality is knowledge and ideas. Ideas are pretty close to non-rival. And so when we invent new technologies, they leak across the borders. They go to China. Sometimes China even steals them. We should let them in this case. That's going to ruffle feathers. But anyway, when we push down the price of renewable energy by innovation, that makes decarbonization cheaper for every country in the world. And what you've noticed is that, so India, let's take India, which many people thought was going to grow to become another China. India has huge coal reserves. It's trying very hard to industrialize. It's run by a guy who, like, DGAF. Modi does not care about you and your problems. And so India was a huge candidate for like climate doom. It's going to become another China. And China, as you know, emits more than twice the emissions of the US, and, you know, like just absolute emissions bomb, and is still adding coal plants. So, but India didn't have as many coal plants because it was an earlier stage of industrialization, but now India is canceling coal plants at rapid speed and installing solar instead because the price got cheap. And, you know, maybe India doesn't care, you know, and so at the Paris climate talks, India strongly resisted having to shoulder any of the burden of decarbonization. And they had a moral case for it, which is rich countries in the past did all the emissions, right? You're responsible for these historical emissions. Number two, you're living high on the hog. You have these high per capita emissions. We're not going to do anything till you do anything. So that's the moral case. But also the selfish case is just like, we have all these incredibly poor people who are like pooping in the forest because they're so poor. We need to get these people income no matter what. And we're not going to shoulder the burden of climate change. And so we talk about the free rider problem as if it's this immorality, and yet Indian people are pooping in the forest. Although they've made great strides in sanitation under Modi. It's one good thing he's done. But so desperately poor that they were not going to compromise that growth. No way, no how. And so, but when solar got cheap, and batteries too, although for India, it's mostly solar at this point, and wind to a lesser extent. But when solar got cheap, India's like, okay, makes sense. It's the cheapest thing. We'll install it. So now India's canceling coal plants left and right and approving massive amounts of solar on pure self-interest alone because they know it's not going to hurt their growth. We helped do that. Germany helped do that by subsidizing solar long before it was economical. We helped do that by subsidizing solar long before it was economical. China helped do that by subsidizing solar in order to capture the solar market and provide a lot of employment. These subsidies, which you know, good neoliberals will dismiss as corporate welfare, as pork, actually worked because of this cool thing called a learning effect. And the learning effect is that if you buy a crap ton of something, we learn how to make it cheaper. And these learning curves have been startlingly constant. When you look at the learning curves for solar, for batteries, the wind one is slower, although also fairly constant as well. You look at these like 10-fold declines every decade. So every decade, solar, it costs 10% of what it cost a decade ago. When you look at those things, you look, and I forget who all authors are, but Jessica Transick is the first author on this this paper where they looked at the factors, and their methodology is pretty good. I looked it up, but they looked at the factors that have been driving the decreases, and they found that it was government-sponsored research up until around 2000, but after that, it became deployment. So deployment was highly subsidized, learning by doing took over, and that has just rapidly decreased the price. Learning by doing generates a bunch of ideas as well, ideas that then leak to other firms, or we can just, like, America can sell the stuff, or China can sell the stuff. And so this thing, because of this research, because of the learning effect, and because of the global nature of the research externality. Remember, research generates a positive global externality. Climate generates a negative global externality, which is one of the reasons why single country carbon taxes have such a hard time handling it. However, research is this global externality because everybody finds out how to do the cheap solar really quick. And once we figure out, oh, here's how we make a solid state battery, here's how we make a cheaper solar panel, it spreads really fast. People reverse engineer. There's industrial espionage. There's just, people hire other people. There's licensing. There's all kinds of things that happen that spread these ideas. Companies get hired abroad. Employees get hired by different companies. There's a million ways that ideas leak out. Global positive externality. Our big investments in solar help to push down the cost to the point where India is decarbonizing out of pure self-interest. Massive, massive win. That's much, much larger than anything any carbon tax has ever done on this planet, or all the carbon taxes combined will do far less than simply getting India to not become another China. And those numbers are
so
pretty
your
slim.
argument then essentially is that climate economics has there were specific papers and models that are wrong, but that the field is just too narrow to focus on the scope of the problem of, like,
has been. There's people focusing on the technology thing now. They're not getting a ton of attention.
Which is going to be my next question, is a lot of people were like, you haven't looked at the research that's come out in the past few years. Have you seen better signs in the past few years that the climate economics literature is getting better?
Yeah, no, it's getting better, but first of all, you still have, the massive intellectual cachet of people like Nordhaus and Greenstone is still very dominant. And if someone's going to trot out a climate expert, they're not going to call the assistant professor who's working on the really good model in cooperation with some climate scientists and publishing it in a climate journal. And as you know, economics is very, ultimately, all the problems of economics really come back to the self-containedness of the profession and the fact that economics is sort of this system where nobody else gets to judge it and they just judge themselves. This extremely hierarchical, closed profession. But and that's true here too. So you see the top econ journals not publishing like the good news stuff. That stuff's getting published in lower ranked journals and in journals that are interdisciplinary or not economics journals at all. And so that stuff tends to not get you as famous. Twitter might change that. Twitter might give some of the really good new climate economists a chance. So I talked to, there's a few climate economists who are, everybody mentions, like Gernot Wagner is one of the, I'm probably mispronouncing it, European name. I've only read it, but he is one of the people that everyone talks about as being sort of this next crop, this next generation, really good climate scientists. I'm going to, talk to him on Monday, but I think he was generally complimentary of the post. He's seen the reason he decided to do better stuff was because he saw some of the old problems with the old stuff and knew the problems with the famous influential guys. And he, if you're a young person within the field, even if you're doing better research, you can't talk shit about the old people in the field. You just can't. It's professional suicide. You cannot do it. I can do it. I have the freedom as
You're a
just
poster.
a blogger.
You're allowed to do that kind of stuff.
I'm a shit poster. That's right. I can talk some shit. And so with macroeconomics, you saw this. With macroeconomics, I would hang out with like young APs or grad students or whatever. They'd be like, "You're completely right. Everything you're saying about macroeconomics is right." And they knew this, but yeah, maybe I put it into slightly better words than they've been able to put it in their own minds, but they knew all this conceptually. And then they dedicated their lives to improving it. And a lot of them are doing a great job. They're doing a bang up job. I like what they're doing.
You can probably take credit in part for improving the quality of macroeconomics.
0.01%. I'll take credit.
Which is a significant portion of GDP. So thank you, Noah.
Maybe. Well, the problem with macroeconomics is that our data is so crap that we won't even know if we get it right. But
discussion for another day.
Discussion for another day. But anyway, the point is that I can talk shit about the famous guys. I can say that Nordhaus's model is banana pants. That is not a thing that even the very best junior climate economist can say. Even in private, they won't say it because someone will tattle. And so they can't say it. They've got to keep it to themselves. But they all know it's true. And they're all working to change it. It's the need to change this is inspiring their work. But in the meantime, when you have the public interface, when you have people in democratic administrations looking for climate economists to partner with, there's still this institutional thing of who do we call? Let's call up Greenstone. He was this guy, he headed the committee to calculate the social cost of carbon in the Obama administration. Let's call that guy up. He's a guy we know. He's sort of like, the Larry Summers of climate econ in that way. And so call him up or call Nordhaus. He won a Nobel Prize. And so criticism of where the field has been in the past and criticism of some of the old guys who are in charge of the field can tell politicians and staffers and whoever in the Democratic Party who might want to talk to a climate economist or hire a climate economist or appoint a climate economist, et cetera. It will tell them that that the old guys don't necessarily, know or aren't necessarily the good people you want to talk to, which they've already kind of figured out on their own. But this blog post, of course, helps confirm it. But the Biden people have already figured out that the old guy, famous guy, climate economists are not necessarily people that you talk to. And so now, the work can begin of finding good young climate economists who are working on fixing the field and getting them to talk to the Biden administration and future Democratic administrations and hopefully future Republican administrations. And so hopefully that work can begin. And that work has really, so I think in macroeconomics, we've seen this very interesting shift where, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you'd call up an economist who did stuff about financial markets. Now you call up an economist who does empirical work on labor. You used to call up Larry Summers and now you call up Cecilia Rouse. That is a big shift. It does not represent a diminution of prestige or influence for the economic profession, merely a shift in the kind of economics and the economists themselves who are tapped on the shoulder and who are given influence. And that is what I think it should be the goal for climate economics in the long run, or as soon as possible, is to basically get Democrats and intellectuals and climate activists and climate scientists and everybody involved in this stuff to understand that that there was this long period of badness. And you might say, okay, well, why didn't you put a big section about how like the young people are good and try to draw this distinction in that post? And I'm like, because, well, A, that blunts the messaging, but B, I'm not 100%, I don't 100% trust all the young people. I don't yet assume that all the young people know exactly what's good and stuff like that. The young people need to know that there needs to be a break, and they know it already, but they need to know that everybody else, it's a higher order belief thing. They need to know that all the people on Capitol Hill know it.
Well, that was a wonderful explanation, and it was significantly less pugnacious than your piece, and I feel like it clarified what your criticism is, because now I'm on board with what you're saying. Maybe I think the degree of how far you went with certain things is a bit off, but I think this explanation really triangulated what your argument was and clarified specifically what you're getting at when we talk about carbon taxes. The final thing I would push back on is that I do believe, and like this came up in our conversation with Scott Peters, is like most of the people who believe in carbon taxes, and I think this includes economists, also are on board with a variety of other initiatives to abate climate change. And maybe there's like a like certain economist who is like carbon taxes and then we don't have to do anything else. But I think by and large, the people who have gotten to the level in which they believe climate change is an existential threat also believe that, like, hey, there's a bunch of other regulations and government programs and prizes and stuff that we can do to also help the fight. But carbon taxes are an important component as well.
I hope that is the message, but you definitely see a large contingent of economists who, by the way, are not all climate economists, and many are not. Climate economists themselves may want carbon tax to be one of a number of instruments that we use. However, you see a lot of people who are, ideologically libertarian, of course, but I'm not ad homineming here. It's like they do what they do. Who say, economists who are like, whenever you suggest, like subsidizing green energy, like, no, don't do this inefficient subsidy, just put a price on carbon. And they just yell, don't do that, put a price on carbon. Don't do this, put a price on carbon. That's the mot.
But does that person actually exist? Is this a straw
it's
man?
Wojtek, it's my friend.
I was paying attention to what Wojtek was saying. I didn't hear him say exclusively carbon taxes are necessary, but maybe that is what he was saying. But I wasn't paying enough attention to have an opinion.
Look at the back and forth that he had with.
All right, I will.
And Ivan Werning is trying to explain these two externalities. Is trying to explain the blah 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 to Wojtek, and Wojtek's like, no, carbon tax. And then like you see other people come in like this conservative think tank guy Don Schneider, whom I like that guy, but he's not a jerk. But he comes in and he's like, no, just carbon tax. Anything else is pork, corporate subsidies, blah, blah, blah. It's like, and the idea that that econ has focused so laser-like on the carbon tax, maybe climate economists knew that we needed to do other stuff and just didn't think they had comparative advantage or added value in talking about the other stuff. But the focus on the social cost of carbon and setting, set marginal cost equal to marginal benefit, carbon tax, it's what economists know how to do. And like that focus has enabled people who are maybe they're climate economists, maybe they're not climate economists, maybe they're other kinds of economists, maybe they're not even economists, maybe they're just sort of econ interested people who are kind of on the fringes of this debate, it's enabled them to say, don't do this, put a price on carbon. Don't do that, put a price on carbon. And you saw this in response to the Green New Deal. You saw a lot of critics. I was a critic of the Green New Deal because I thought it put too much like random like entitlement stuff in the Green New Deal. But that was my problem with it. I like the actual green parts of it. And in fact, Shekhar Chakrabarty wrote that thing. And he, and I interviewed him on the blog. He's an interesting guy, very industrial policy sort of fanatic. Good guy. A little verbose. Anyway, so then, but he wrote the Green New Deal, and and he's a tech guy who believes in big solutions to big problems. Anyway, but a lot of the critics of the Green New Deal said, don't do any of this, just put a price on carbon. And I can forward you those articles, but you can find them with a quick Google. You can just look at Green New Deal carbon tax. Just Google that. You'll see people are like, here's why this would be better than the Green New Deal. Put a price on carbon. And like, yeah, no one really listens to those people. And the real reason the Green New Deal got sunk is because it was a giant like Noah's Ark of entitlement spending. And that was why. And then they took the environmental parts of the Green New Deal and they sort of quietly inserted a lot of that into Biden's plan, Biden's infrastructure plan. That's the stealth Green New Deal right there. But which is, we've known we needed to do something like that for a long time. But the fact is that econ peripheral people were able to use the carbon tax as this kind of club to beat all the other policies, which frankly are going to have a bigger impact than carbon tax, in my opinion, in my assessment.
All right. Well, I don't want to hold you for any longer, but thank you, Noah, for that actually very enlightening explanation of your piece. I hope some people who are critical of it listen to it, because they might still be critical of the specific language you use, but you might be enlightened about like your criticism is a bit more narrow than what you
well,
make
this is
in
the meta criticism. That was a 4,000 word piece.
It was quite long.
Hours to write. And I know that people's eyes glaze over, and I just don't think to put in another section about like why structure a criticism like this, who is this, who is supposed to hear this, who is not supposed to hear this, what are they supposed to take away from it? I just don't think that way, and maybe I should. Maybe op-ed writers should have a section, who needs to hear this and what do they need to take away from it? I'm not sure that will work, because like What if you read the
Just
sections for the other people and take the other thing away?
Axios doesn't. They get away with it. So
The Axios does do that, and like
I don't
then
hate
again,
it.
I don't read Axios, but
There you
they
go.
do that.
Each their own.
Well, it's just too.
It's very
can't take all the,
DC.
like yes, all the beltway shit.
Yeah.
It's not for me, but you know they do a good job. But then so I didn't put that meta section in there, and the spiel that I gave you right now was a meta spiel,
Mm-hmm.
and that was something that I have said that I have articulated with regards to macroeconomics, but I wrote literally hundreds of blog posts about that,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of came out as a body of work. I'll write follow-up posts. I'm going to write follow-up posts about good stuff that's getting done in climate economics and who's doing it, and I'll write stuff about like peripheral schmucks, using carbon tax as a club. And I'll write these things in the future. It's just like dumping it all in one essay that's already 4,000 words is a little long. And I think that this, the broad side is bracing. It gets people to realize there's a problem. And if you say, here's the problem, and then here's the solution, people glaze over. And if you say bad, then people read.
All right. Well, Noah, thank you for coming on the chat about that. I'm glad that this is actually what's going on here. So I still take away that my initial read of it, I was like, this is insightful. And then I take away especially more now knowing that, like, okay, this is the specific criticism that is being made. But it's good to see you again. It's been too long since having you on the stream. And I hope to make it out to San Francisco sometime soon. Once all this COVID bullshit is over.
You vaccinated yet?
I'm one dose in, and then I'm getting my second dose in like a week. So it'll be very soon when I'm traveling again. But who knows when I'll be back in San Francisco.
Awesome. Hope to see you then, man.
All right, Noah. Thanks again.
Take care.
All right, everyone. Well, I hope you learned something from that Noah stream. I did. I really did. Like when I first read it, I was like, this is insightful. And then the next day, the hate came in. And then I was like, oh, the people who are hating on this make some good points. And now I feel like I have gotten pure centrism. I feel like now I understand the point Noah is making and why it's important, because I don't entirely disagree with many of the things he said, but I do think the importance of a carbon tax should not be understated. So that is it. I keep holding up my mask. I don't know why I keep holding up my mask, but if you kept seeing that in the background, that was my mask. With that, we are going to call it a night on the stream. I want to thank everyone who showed up to hear Representative Scott Peters talk. I know for a fact he was delighted, and I think it generally is enthusiastic to see so many people who care about this kind of stuff and are enthusiastic for pragmatic solutions. And I want to thank the people who stuck around to hear Noah Smith's explanation. It was definitely wordy, and if you're not steeped in economics, you might have been like, what the fuck is a dice model? But I think it's important to discern of like, climate economics is a field and it's important and it should play a role. Why is it playing less of a role? And I think Noah's criticism is mostly correct. We stream pretty often here at the Neoliberal Project stream, or the Center for New Liberalism stream. So I hope you'll follow us if you haven't already, so that you'll tune in for the next stream. And I hope that for our next big event with some other elected official, because hopefully this will lead to more, you guys will join us as well. Again, I want to thank the Progressive Policy Institute for making this event happen, my colleagues Phil LaRue and Aaron White, as well as Jeremiah, as always, for doing all the hard work tonight that went into getting questions and moderating and making sure this event was a success. So thank you all. And again, thank you all for attending. I am sure I will see you again sometime in the near future. I bet you I'll be streaming next week, but might not have a star-studded guest next time around. Thanks.